Hello guys, this is Saixmoondancer, and since I've played the Brewmaster Monk through the whole expansion, I decided to do a 5.4 guide in order to let everyone else enjoy this beautiful class. In the first section I'm going to go through the talents. In the first row you may decide to choose any of the talents since they are only regarding the movement. The first one, Celerity, just give you one more roll and 5 seconds less on cooldown for every roll. This can be quite useful also for the challenge mode of Scarlet Owls when you need to carry forward the bullseye and you need to, the only speed increase is the rolls. The second talent, Tiger's Lust, is just a sprint, like the Rogue Sprint, and it removes the impairing effect, so it can be useful if the boss of some of the opponents may frost you on the ground. While the last talent, Momentum, just give you a small speed increase after every roll, which stacks. So if you have the first one and you roll the second time, you have a 50% instead of 25%. For the concerns the second row, you have mostly healing talents. The most important one is G-Wave, which is the first, because especially for single target bosses, it goes on the boss and then jumps back on the lowest, on the target with the lowest health. The Zen Sphere is almost useless because it provides 2 less healing with respect to the other 2s, while the Chi Burst, it can be used for heavy damage on the raid because it really is a cooldown, but it has a 30-second cooldown instead of the 15 seconds. So you pretty much don't use it to push damage but to heal your mates. If you have a good vengeance, it's a very good healing. The third row basically is about your chi regeneration and how you deal with that. So I suggest you to use Ascension, because it gives you 1 more chi and 15% more Ust, which also counts for survivability when you fall below 35% and desperate measures trigger. The fourth row is about control. You may choose to have Leg Sweep, since you have all adds around, this is the best choice, or Ring of Peace if you need an AoE silence. For what concerns the fifth row, you have Diffuse Magic, which is very useful for heavy magic bosses like Megara or others, Immersius, and you pretty much use Dump and Arm instead for all the other bosses, like to pick up mines for the Juggernaut or any other bosses that does heavy melee damage like Garrosh. For the last row, you may go to invoke Xuen if you have a single boss or very small AoE. You don't need to put the Rushing Jade Wind, while for bosses like Galacross or bosses that requires a lot of AoE, you must use Rushing Jade Wind. Also for the heroic version of Immersius when there are so many ads, and personally I take them, so I need to have a good aggro on them every time. Okay guys, Glyphs. For what concerns Glyphs, you can use Breath of Fire for heavy ad encounters like Galacross, so you can interrupt also the cast of some of the ads. Dueling Spheres would also trigger on the Jackox spheres, making their duration longer by 3 minutes. Fortifying Brew is quite useful because we don't really need health, but we need damage reduction. The Fortuitous Spheres is also a good cooldown if you fall below 25% health, which is good in combination with the Healing Elixir talent. The Glyph of Guard must only be used for the heavy damage encounters. Spinning Crane Kick only if you don't have Rushing Jade Wind, and there are some ads like in the Garrosh encounter I use Xuen personally, but I then need to be very quick in the interfaces, so I need a Glyph. Zen Meditation and Targeted Expulsion could be very useful, but they are not mandatory. The minor glyphs are up to you, since they're all things that change the skin, some spells and else. It is absolutely mandatory to have int and expertise capped. The int rating is capped at 7.5 and the expertise at 15%. If you are dual wild, you need to cap only the first weapon. This means that since I am a dwarf, I only need 15% in the main end, while in the offhand I need 14%. There are 3 builds, as you can see: balanced build, a crit build, which is especially suited for a good damage throughput in the 10-man, and a mastery build, especially good for the 25-man. All the stats are weighted on a 5.4 item level or more. To show you the full potential of a Brewmaster monk, I decided to go on a challenge by myself, just to let you see what are the buffs you need to keep always up, and all the things you need to do in order to survive. The Brewmaster monk is completely different from other tanks. I used to play warrior and paladin, and they are quite static. They are there just to take damage and be healed through. They have a lot of passives that makes them very powerful against more or less every enemy. The monk instead is quite weak in the sense that it is a ladder more or less, and all the stuff used to survive are activated by you, so you need to take 100% time the shuffle, which is done by using blackout kick, and it gives you 20% parry and 20% more stagger. And there are also two other buffs that are very helpful. One of them is the Tiger Palm buff, which gives you 30% ignore armor of the enemies, and the next guard you use is more effective of 30%. Another cooldown you need to use is the Elusive Brew. It is a stack which goes from 1 to 15 and that has a cooldown of 6 seconds, or if you use with more than 6 stacks, the cooldown depends on how many stacks you used. Essentially, it gives you 30% dodge for 1 second for each stack, and the stacks are done by just critting your melee attacks. Every melee attack has a chance to generate 1 to 3 Elusive Brew charges, of course. So, just before using guard, which is one of the most important cooldown you have, be sure to have the buff of the Tiger Spawn, then pop guard, and remember that when you have guard, all healing done by you and yourself are increased by 30%. So as long as the guard is up, you are a very effective healer for yourself. Another stuff, the Brewmaster monk has no heavy cooldowns like the paladin with a reduction of 50% or something like that. Fortunately, you have many. There is the talent, the 4th tier, which gives you Fuse Magic, very useful against any magical bosses like Megara, or Dampen Arm, which essentially reduces by 50% the next 3 hits the boss give you, and it is very useful for bosses that give you like the General Nightgrim heroic fight, when the execute is a very huge damage. It is very predictable, and if you pop Dampen Arm before the strike just land, well, it reduces the total amount of damage you take by 50%, which is a lot. And then you have Zen Meditation, which is quite useful for the raid, to just soak in 5 spells directed to your colleagues, to your raid members. And It also provides you the first melee hit to be reduced by 90%, so it is pretty useful. I used sometimes to tank Undasta on the just by myself, so I was able to take all the explosions without using another tank. Then there is Avatar, which is quite useful. It increases the amount of stagger by 20%, also, although it is not written in the tooltip, so you can use it for personal cooldown too, but it is like the divine sacrifice of previous expansion of the paladin. So essentially you just redirect 20% of all the damage the other take to you, and if you fall below 10%, the buff is broken. The good part is that you can stagger all those damage, so you can just throw them away when needed. In the end, there is the Fortifying Brew, which is the strongest cooldown you have. It just reduces damage taken by 20% and increases the stagger by 20%. It seems like it is not very strong, since it just reduces by 20%. It's not like the Guardian of a Paladin that reduces the damage by 50%, but the stagger more is essentially your life. Well, basically, the whole tanking as a Brewmaster monk flips around the stagger. So you need to understand how it works and how not to waste your chi in order to purify it. It is quite difficult to learn at the beginning because you need to understand when you can take damage and when you need to purify. For instance, all red stagger must be purified, while for the yellow you need to understand if you are below a certain percentage of health and if you cannot take any more damage.